So I'm doing a video today to talk about a question that gets asked on the internet all the time, and that is it wise or a good idea to purchase a used air compressor off of like Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist? So first off, spoiler alert, I just bought this Husky 20-gallon ultra silent air compressor. I did buy it used that I found on Craigslist. So I did think that it was a good idea for me. But I wanted to talk through a little bit behind my decision-making process, why I thought it was a good purchase, and some tips for how you can evaluate and find a good air compressor if you are purchasing used to try and get a better price. First off, as with anything that you're purchasing, if you are at a crunch where you absolutely need something, you're trying to start a project and you need it, it limits your options because you can't be choosy. So I do recommend trying to purchase this at a time where you're not in desperate need for an air compressor. Two, with anything, when you're shopping online in a used marketplace, be judicious with who you even decide to interact with. If someone posts up a listing that has one little photo of something that looks like it was taken from a camera phone from like 2004, just pass on it. It's not even worth your time trying to email back and forth with someone that doesn't really know how the digital world works. Likewise, if their description is like used air compressor, then don't even bother with it. Three, trust the way it looks. I've been burnt a couple times on different things where I said, cosmetically it's not in great shape, but mechanically it's good. And that's almost never the case. Usually if something does look old and beat up, that's an indication as to how it's been used and how it's been taken care of. So if it looks like it's been sitting behind someone's farm shed for the last 20 years, you know what? It's probably a rusted through tank. It's probably something that's gonna have some issues with it. So when I saw this listing on Craigslist, I already knew what I was looking at because I had already done a lot of research into the different models, and this one was already on my radar. I specifically asked them that if I was to come and see it, would I be able to turn it on, operate it, bring my own air tool, and cycle the tank and compressor a few different times to make sure that it's getting up to pressure properly, kicking back on properly when the pressure in the tank drops. And then I also wanted to drain the tank, look for signs of moisture and things like that. I specifically asked them if there was any known mechanical issues with it, just straight up, even if it wasn't advertised. I wanted them to specifically say yes or no. And then I also asked them if there was any signs of dents or dings. So the person that was selling this one was actually a junk dealer. They get pallets and truckloads of product returns from Lowe's, Home Depot, Amazon, Target, and various retailers. And they sort through it and decide what can be resold, what can't. And so they were not an air compressor expert, and they obviously were not the end user of this. So they had no information on the history of this. But they were more than accommodating to let me do my own inspection. So when I first arrived to look at it, the first thing I did was to look for signs of damage. So obviously I've got a little bit of the decal and graphic that's peeling off, but I'm not that concerned about this. I was rubbing down the steel and the tank and looking for any dents or gouges that looked like maybe it had been dropped, maybe trying to unload it off the back of a truck, something like that. And the tank was actually in really good shape. Really, all of the paint was intact. It was really just kind of scraping of the decal. So that could have been someone trying to get it out of the tailgate of their truck, but it didn't look in bad shape. The next thing that I did is I wanted to drain the bottom of the tank. The problem is when you compress air, you can get moisture inside the tank. And if you never fully drain it, then you can collect water inside it and it can actually rust from the inside out. So there's a drain valve under here. So the first thing I did was I opened it up, and there was a little bit of residual air inside, and there was a couple droplets of water that drained out. Had a little bit of a rusty look, but it's not like it was draining out, say, a half gallon of rusty water out onto the floor. It was just a few droplets. The next thing I did is I just gave it a visual look into the different components. You got the pump, the rubber isolator feet, everything just kind of felt tight. There was no rips in the rubber. I was looking around at the different fittings and making sure that nothing was loose, falling off, and things like that. On the roll bar, it didn't look like there was any major dents or dings or damage here, just a little bit of scuffs on the paint. So with that, I felt good that the tank was in good shape, no major dents or damage, and just visual inspection, it lined up with what the picture showed. So then I closed the bottom of the tank, and the first thing I want to do is turn it on. Now, because I did my own product research, I did find some reviews of this specific air compressor on YouTube and on different vlogs and everything. And I found out that it's supposed to take about 6 to 7 minutes to completely fill the tank. So I wanted to go ahead, shut the tank, and go ahead and turn it on. I I took the stopwatch on my phone and I timed it while it ran, and it took about 6 minutes and 50 seconds to completely fill it up from completely empty all the way to shutting it off. So the tank gauge shows a little over 160-ish right now, maybe a little bit lower than that, but that's probably close enough given the tolerance of a pressure switch. And so I'm listening for other signs of air escaping now that the compressor is not running. So you can listen and feel around at the different joints of the hoses, and there was no air escaping. I waited about 5 to 10 minutes. I looked at other stuff that was in the shop that they had, and then I came back and it had not really bled down at all. So I felt confident that the hoses were good, that the tank was good, and it was holding air. The one thing I noticed is that the tool gauge was at 0, so the regulator was turned all the way off. And so I said it's about time to hook a tool up to it, so I'm just going to go ahead and turn the regulator. And that's where we have the problem. This fitting is leaking. It's this fitting specifically. This one is not leaking at all. And so when you put air from the pressurized tank into the regulator, this fitting is blowing through. And that is the clue behind probably why the owner of this decided to return it and probably get a brand new one from Home Depot. A leaking fitting. So now that the tank is full and I identified that it does have a leaky fitting on the output side of the regulator, I wanted to go ahead and hook up my own tool. So this is just a 3-inch cutoff tool. I don't even have a blade on it. And this is a McGraw brand from Harbor Freight. So doing some additional YouTube recon, I was getting a feel for how long I should be able to attach a tool and run it wide open, and based on what the pressure of the tank should be. So I actually went ahead and I plugged my tool into the leaky fitting, and then I went ahead and let the regulator out, because if it leaks through the fitting, but if the fitting can hold the tool, then the tool should be holding the pressure back. And I've got the regulator wide open now, and there is no more air leaking through. So that tells me it is just the fitting, and that if I replace the fitting, everything should work fine. So I went ahead and I just held this wide open until the tank kicked back on, so I could verify what pressure in the tank it would take to turn it back on. And there you go, you got the tank back up to a little over 150, right around the 160 mark. And based on my YouTube recon, I also had a feel for how long it should take for the switch to cut off, and then how long it would take from cut off to fill it back up. And I took all those measurements on my stopwatch, and I felt good with where everything was at. Because the fill-up time was within the ballpark of what I've been reading online, that tells me that the pump is generally putting out the air that it's supposed to be. So yes, there's this fitting here that was having a leak, but you know what? All of my air tools have high flow fittings. These are the ones from Home Depot, the Husky brand, but they make these for Harbor Freight. They make these for Lowe's with Cobalt. So before I even used any of my tools on this compressor, I was going to replace that fitting anyway. So I literally did not care that this had a bad fitting. I'll replace them both. This is a scrap hose that I have, and I'm just going to take that fitting off, swap it onto this air compressor, and then I'm going to have a fully functional air compressor for a fraction of the cost of what it was brand new. But the moral of the story is, do your research. Don't put yourself in a position where you have to act quickly. Give it a good visual inspection, make sure it looks good, and then make sure it performs good and is consistent with what you've been able to learn from YouTube research, you know, different reviews and vlogs. And then you can get yourself a pretty good deal. So this one is much quieter, although I do hear a little bit of a rattle. That's from the sheet metal shield. So I'm going to have to maybe adjust this a little bit and keep it from vibrating up against the regulator behind it. Maybe use some sticky foam or some padded rubber or something along those lines. So that's how I went and picked out a used air compressor, and it really, in my mind, it met my needs. And generally same style pump that I used to have, oil-free, 4.0 CFM at 90 PSI, much bigger tank, much quieter. So I'm happy with what I got. So thanks for watching. Like and subscribe if you enjoy the content of these videos. We'll see you in the next one.